Welcome, everyone. We are here. I'm your substitute host, Julie Turner from Sympraxis Consulting for the Viva Connections and SharePoint Framework biweekly sync. It is January 27th, and away we go. So today's agenda, we're obviously going to do the latest updates on the SharePoint Framework, patterns and practice updates for the various teams, some new community samples, picture time, obviously, with Together Mode. So we'd love to have you join us for that by turning your cameras on when it comes to that time. And then we'll have 3 demos today from my fabulous coworker, Derek Cash-Peterson, who's going to do some CRUD operations using Viva Connections. That's a very cool sample. I saw that yesterday. Paulo Pastore will do Viva Connections as well on data binding in the SharePoint Framework Adaptive Card Extensions. And last but certainly not least, the wonderful Hugo will do SPFx Design Patterns. So we have many, many opportunities for you to participate in the PnP, doing demos. Obviously, you can reach out. There's an AKAMS link there so that if you have something you want to show, something cool you built, we'd love to have you present it in one of our calls. And so you can use that form there to request a demo spot and obviously do that. You can also contribute to any one of our GitHub repos. There are plenty of them, and we'd love to have people help out reporting issues, submitting pull requests, even helping with issues and questions can be really big help to us, especially when there's sometimes small teams. And then provide feedback, not only negative feedback, but positive feedback. We love it all. So please feel free to do that. So we have so many resources for you. We have videos, we have community videos, we have open source content that you can share. We have sample galleries that can get you started. Those are really wonderful. If you want to build something and you're not exactly sure how to go about it, finding a sample that is either what you need or something close to what you need can really help you get going. And then we have all the various links, but there is one you should just remember, the aka.ms M365 PnP. That's going to get you to our a landing page that helps you navigate to all these other fabulous resources. So feel free to use that. Okay, so we have a Microsoft 365 platform call on the 1st of February. That's at 8 a.m. Pacific time. And so this is our agenda for that call. Altmish, the latest on the bookings API, Dan Whalen, access to user calendar events, and Sebastian using MDT agenda and task components in your solutions. So definitely join that call to hear about those great topics. Okay. This is Sharing is Caring, so I think that's over to you, David.
Yes, that is over to me. Thank you, Julie. Yep. And friends, as you know, and Julie had said, we have plenty and so many opportunities for you to contribute, utilize the resources and tools that are available within our community. But we also understand that there may be some hurdles in place that prevent you from not only even using them, but hey, even contributing back. Sharing is Caring is a program that is set up to provide you hands-on guidance in safe space opportunities where you can learn how to do it together with members of other PnP teams and MVPs. We will walk you through how to do like your first pull request or how you can prepare for a presentation for an upcoming demo if you would like to do that. We have a wide spectrum of topics, all of which are available for registration. Our popular Ask Me Anythings are up for this month or coming up in February and March on React controls and Graph and MGT. Those are great opportunities to work directly with the administrators for the programs where you can ask questions in an open forum. And so we invite anybody to join these. You can register at aka.ms/sharingiscaring. Now, once you've done that, we want to celebrate all the amazing work that you've done. In fact, you may have seen some sharing of these badges today. What is it? It's from the PnP Recognition Program. We're partnering with Credly, yes, the same Credly that manages the certification programs for Microsoft and issues those badges. We want to recognize and celebrate the work you're doing in a formal way. These can be shared and associated and attached to your LinkedIn profile, shared on Twitter, added to your website. Again, we want to celebrate you for all the amazing work you're doing. We do need you to opt in, aka.ms/M365 PnP-recognition. Absolutely no cost for you. There's all kinds of new badges coming out, from PnP PowerShell to blog authors, script samples. Sharing is Caring is getting its new badge, and we're going to have a ton of opportunities to get unique badges that are time sensitive. So definitely opt in, and we would love to celebrate you. Julie, back to you.
Awesome. Thank you, David. And so moving along to the SharePoint Framework update, I believe this is going to be Vesa.
That is correct. So let's actually move to the following slide, Julie. Thank you. So this one we had already 2 weeks ago. Just a reminder, if you are an ISV or a system integrator and you're looking into moving into the ISV area or have some of your offerings available through the ISV channels, there is a free benefits available for you if you're registered to the Microsoft 365 ISV programs. So we strongly recommend check this out. And as the more users you will have in your components and solutions for Viva, which includes SharePoint Framework, because that's what you built for Viva Desktop, Viva Connection Desktop, and Viva Mobile, you can get even more marketing benefits and even money based on the usage of the solution, which is really, really cool. So please do check that one out. Let's go to the following slide. Just making sure that everybody is aware of this, we did push out a new version of 1.14 beta. So this is beta 5. Externally, we've been pushing out beta 4 and beta 5 now. So that went live yesterday. It has a lot of new features and capabilities and fixes, and it's all listed now in the release notes already. So the release notes is super long because there's so many changes and updates on there, and a lot of issue fixes, for example, based on the issues which you have reported to us. So cool stuff. Please check it out. If you find out any issues on that, please get them reported. I also wanted to call out the progress related on usage. It's just looks amazing. The worldwide usage of third-party, meaning the custom components built for SharePoint Online, not by Microsoft, by our customers and partners, is growing rapidly. So we did an all-time record again this week on Monday. It's typically Monday or Tuesday, which are the most highest on the usage. And it's great to see that after the holiday break, we are back in line on the massive growth on the usage, which is really, really cool. So there's more than tens of millions of users using custom components built with SPFx in Microsoft 365, which is cool. Let's go to the following slide. Quick recap on the 1.14. So right now, the 1.14, it's a bit delayed. Originally, we were planning to push it out or communicated to push it out in January. We will push out a release candidate most likely next week or later, latter part of next week or the week after. And then in the mid-February, we will push out the 1.14 version. We're not expecting there to be that many issues at this point anymore. We've been getting a lot of good input from a lot of the community members on that. And other than that, a lot of improvements coming up as well. 1.15 is scheduled to come out this spring as well. For example, list format and extensibility options and all of that is then in 1.15. But we'll get back on more detailed on what's coming out when as we get those locked out. The new app catalog experience, for example, calling that one out, is intended to get released by end of March. So that's the Q1 on this calendar year. But that's a quick update from engineering side on SPFx for Viva and Teams and SharePoint. Let's get it back to you, Julie.
All right, so PnPjs client-side libraries. That's actually me, and I have nothing new to offer. Both Patrick and I have been working very diligently on tightening up any holes in version 3 and trying to do really good documentation updates so that it's really easy for everybody to get started on the transition to V3. So we've been doing lots and lots of work there. We've been focusing all our energies. I am trying to answer issues in the issues list. Anyone that wants to help me out there, I'd love to have it. But that is the current status of the PnPjs library. Okay, so let me move on. So now we have the CLI for Microsoft 365. They have a new preview version 4.4 with lots and lots of updates, it looks like. So I would encourage you to go read their notes on that release. So we won't read those right here on this call, but definitely check out all of those great updates to the CLI. That's a great tool for everyone who needs to work directly with a scripting language against the Microsoft 365 platform. So definitely check those out. SPFx reusable components. Let me quickly go through that. We have the React Controls 3.5.0 updated to SPFx 1.13 support, enhancements for multiple controls, updated localization. That's very cool for German, Norwegian, and Portuguese. Some various fixes. The property controls also got an update to 3.3.0. Again, multiple updates and enhancement to the property field collection data. So some really great stuff there, some definitely lots of shout outs. So we're clearly getting some great community involvement on these reusable controls. So that's great to see. So definitely go check out those updates. Okay, PnP Modern Search. I think that's also going to be me. We have a new 4.5.3 December release that went out with some special thank yous there. So definitely community involvement in this one as well. So check out that 4.5.3. I will say I just checked out that release, and the filters are wonderful. The new updated UX for the filters is really wonderful. So you definitely want to check that out. If you have an older version, you want to check that out. And of course, they're still supporting the V3 version, so they have a 3.23 release as well. So if you're on the older major release, you can check that out as well. All right, let me move forward. We have PnP SPFx Samples. Is this going to be Hugo?
It will be.
Okay, sweet.
Awesome. All right, so we have two repositories that we use for SPFx samples. One is for extensions at aka.ms/SPFx extensions, where there's no new updates over the last 2 weeks. And on the web part side, we have two new updates. One is by Takashi Shinohara called My Approvals, and Shinohara-san updated the My Approvals to actually allow multiple environments to be selected. And then Alex Terentiev has updated the custom property pane controls web part using SPFx 114 and some of the new features that are available in SPFx 114. We welcome updates or contributions from everyone. Thank you for everyone who's been contributing. It's awesome. Please keep going. And that's it for me. I think now we're on to David.
Absolutely. Thank you, Hugo. We've got a couple of new ACEs this week, so awesome stuff. One of which you're going to see demoed right after this from Derek Cash-Peterson, CRUD Operations within an ACE, how you can interact with form elements. Super, super cool. This is just a fantastic training sample, just amazing. And then who doesn't love some sports, right? Certainly not me. I love them. So football stats, and then also people details. We've got a trio of authors on this one, Sumadeep, and Saurav. Created these two samples, and so these are all available at aka.ms/SPFx-ACES. And again, we're open for more contributions, and we're going to have a sharing is caring session coming up, a two-parter on this here soon within the next few weeks. So excited to see that. Thank you as well to all of our contributors. You guys are awesome. Julie, back to you.
Awesome. Okay, so now we have optional picture time, and so who's going to do it? Okay.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I'm a professional, so I'm adding value for this call still. So this is good. This is good.
You are.
So we have 50 seats on the room. Let me try it one more time to change the scene. It did not work for me earlier this week, but let's actually get a chance just to get some variation. And the answer is no. So that's good. Are we already filling in? Let's wait a few more, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Yes, Bill, we can see on the back row, second row. Great way of waving hands. A lot of familiar faces. And there's Don, and there's a lot of Andrea and everything. Okay, so let's actually start the recording. I guess we're maxing out. Not yet. 1 second. 3, 2, 1, and here we go. And some hand waving, everybody. Thank you for being part of the community. You are absolutely awesome. Thank you. And we'll grab a clip animation out of that. Cool. Julie, let's get back to you. Really cool.
Okay.
Oh, the suspense, and it works.
All right. Look at that. And the resume button, for anyone who cares, that resume button did absolutely work. Okay, cool. So we have Derek Cash-Peterson, my friend and colleague, is going to now present CRUD Operations in Viva Connections. So kick me off again. It'll be wonderful.
All right. Cool. All right.
Yeah,
how's that?
There we go.
All right.
Yep.
Perfect.
So
take it away.
All right. So this is an ACE sample that I created. It's basically actually, I should say who I am first. So I'm Derek Cash-Peterson. I'm a principal architect at Sympraxis Consulting. I work with Julie. I'm a member of the PnP team, and I do a lot of UX design and development work. All right. So the thing that I was really trying to do here is I spend most of my time with our clients, either showing data, creating data, editing data, sort of all of those CRUD operations. We've got to get information from people, put it somewhere, and then display it back. And so I wanted to give a way to do that using an adaptive card extension. And when you start looking around at either the different samples that we have, or just in general looking at samples out there in the community, is a lot of them are just really based on like plain text values. And while that's really important to sort of get your feet wet, I started thinking more about, okay, well, what about choice fields? What about multiple choice fields? What about people fields? How do you work with all those different field types that we have in SharePoint and then integrate those with the adaptive card framework? And so that's what I wanted to do. This isn't sort of a production level thing. It was more of an exercise for me to show how to do CRUD operations and make the link between adaptive card extensions and the card views and our SharePoint stuff. So that was the slides. I spent more time trying to get it working than I did. All right, so I've showed the slide. So now I'm going to actually show the demo. So this is the card that I created, and on the dashboard, it has two buttons in the card view. You can view the items, so you can see the items from the list. And the way I built this is it's pulling the items that were last modified or created by you, and it's showing just the title, the last modified, and then who modified it. We've got some icons for display view, so you can see the values coming out of the SharePoint list. And I went and I really just went down the list of all the different types of fields that we could create. So I did title, multiple lines of text, a drop-down list with a choice field, a date field, a radio button, a multi-select checkbox, a number, currency, and a yes/no field. I looked at adding things like MMS and the people picker, and actually up until like last week, there wasn't a way for us to do a people picker, but now there is. So I will update this, and there's also a sample in the gallery that I have to approve to do that. There's the ability to edit the items. So obviously we're passing in the data from the individual item, and we're providing different dropdowns here and different interfaces for that. And then we're providing a way to delete them if you need to, and also create a new item. So you can do it that way. So that's the ACE and what it does, but more importantly, it's really about what the code is doing. And so that's really where I wanted to sort of dive in. So all the stuff, we've talked about ACEs before, and so I'm not going to sort of dive into the sort of the inner workings of how that works, but I did want to start by just showing I created a service, and when the service gets instantiated the first time, the first thing it does is it goes through and it checks to see if the list that it needs exists. Because this is a demo, I wanted to make sure that the list was created with the right fields and the right names and all of that kind of stuff. So it runs through, and if the list doesn't exist, it comes through and actually creates all the different fields with the different values. So I've got a drop-down list that's adding in 3 different choices, a radio field that's adding in 3 different choices, and a multi-select checkbox. So then once it's done, it actually comes in and it grabs the items by the user. And so I'm using PnPjs to grab the data from the list. And one of the things that one of the gotchas that I sort of 2 main gotchas that I encountered was the data coming back from a multi-select choice field comes back as an array, which is great. We like that from a data perspective. But when you need to pass that data to an adaptive card, to the form field, the dropdown, the checkbox, you need a comma-separated list. So I had to get the values from the choice field and then iterate through them and create a comma-separated list. So that was the first thing. The second thing that I ran into was I had to do a date time. I had to convert it to a string using UTC time to make sure that the date picker would actually pick the dates right. So I'm basically pushing everything into a giant array, and the array gets stored into the state. Now, let's see. So when we're in here and we click either edit or save, we can edit these items. You can come in, and then these are basically the update item and save item are more or less the same. But again, I needed to take that comma separated list and I needed to pop it back into an array. All the string values, multi-line of text, single line of text, single choice field, single radio buttons, all of those just pass through as strings. So those aren't really challenging in terms of just popping them in. But the choice field, the multi-select choice field, did present a little bit of an issue there. And so that was it. So the save and the update are really the same, except one calls update and one calls add. And then finally, from the service side, we're just calling delete, get up item by ID, and passing in the item that you're looking at, and then going through delete. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that in the demo, there's a lot of, it's moving cards back and forth. So if you haven't looked at this, it's something you should just check out, because this is the quick view. Then I've got a separate card for display, and another card for edit, and then delete just deletes it. So when you're doing that, you have to make sure that you create IDs for all your different views. And then when you're in the views and you need to click on the different buttons, you can actually call those views, and you call them by doing this dot. And so these are all part of the quick view. So the quick view navigator, and then you're doing a push. So you're telling it which one you want to go to. And in this instance, I've clicked the edit button and I want to go to the edit screen. In this instance, I'm going to the display view. So I want to go to the display view. So the sample also shows how to navigate back and forth between the different views. All right, and that's the demo. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Derek. We had some questions, so you might want to check out the chat. Paulo,
sure.
You are next up, sir. If you are ready, he is going to do his Viva Connections data binding in SharePoint Framework Adaptive Card Extensions. And so I will let you take over.
Yeah. Okay, so hello everyone. And yes, today in this week, we keep on talking about how to develop adaptive cards for Microsoft Viva Connections. And specifically today, I want to explain you how you can leverage the data binding capabilities that we have in Adaptive Card Extensions. So a few words on this slide, and then we will move to the actual demo. So whenever we work with Adaptive Card Extensions, we can store content inside the properties or the state of the Adaptive Card Extension. And once we do that, we can then easily do data binding either in the card views, but as you know, based on the previous episode we saw, in a card view, you have a limited set of information that you can show due to the design and the form factor of those card views, which are just 3 options available. But when we talk and we think about quick views, in there, we can do a lot of stuff. We can format content and data with a lot of options based on the schema of the adaptive card syntax. So for example, we can create lists, tables, we can create interactive forms, as you saw in the previous demo from Derek. You can do conditional formatting, or you can, for example, change colors, visibility, and stuff like that about the fields and properties that you show. You can play with headers and details, and you can show and hide content, and you can even do JSON parsing. So what I'm going to do right now is to share with you some of the options that we have from a practical point of view, so that you can learn how you can do that in your own adaptive card extensions. As such, let me move to the demo and let me show you something which I think is quite cool. So let me move to this example. And here we have an adaptive card extension built with SPFx, which is defined with the orders property of type array of order, just for the sake of having some kind of data for data binding purposes in this state of the adaptive card extension, as well as eventually some other properties in the properties interface of the adaptive card. Now, every single order is made of these properties. So the ID, the date, the status of the order, and the status can be any of these values, the reference customer, and the total amount of the order. And just for the sake of creating an explanatory demo, or a simple one, I decided in the onInit method of these adaptive card extensions to preload a set of orders, because I don't really care about how we will retrieve data for data binding right now. Eventually, in one of the upcoming episodes, we will see how we can consume a Graph or SharePoint REST or any other API. But right now, I just want to focus on how we can do data binding. And so here I have a list of fake orders that I'm just loading in memory in order to do data binding. So once I've done that, I have, and let me show you, I have, for example, here in the workbench, my adaptive card extension running, and we can see a quick view with a recap of the orders, as well as we can see a quick view with the list of orders. So let me dig into those quick views a little bit more. The first one is just a quick view in which we provide, through the data interface of the quick view, a set of content like the orders count and the orders total amount, which are simply based on the orders array that we have in the state of the adaptive card extension. And we can easily, inside the adaptive card JSON syntax, we can easily rely on those properties. So for example, in order to do data binding, we simply need to do $, and we open a curly bracket, and we provide the name of the property that we want to query from the data context of the adaptive card that we are rendering. And as you can see here, we can also play with some functions like, for example, the format number, which can be used to do proper formatting of numbers or currencies inside the output of the adaptive card. But what is more interesting is that in the second quick view that I'm going to show you, we can provide the whole array of orders as the data source for our quick view rendering. And as such, by providing this orders property, which is an array of order objects in the adaptive card definition, we can play with the $data property inside the definition of our adaptive card. So let me try to explain you what we have right here. First of all, we start providing the title like we are used to doing in most of the adaptive cards. And then we provide the subtitle, if any, of the adaptive card. Once you have done that, and if you look at the output, you can recognize these items, then we have a grid, a list with all of the headers and the values. Well, here we have a container where we render all of the headers. So the date, the customer, and so on and so forth. And let me collapse this one. And then we have the whole list of orders rendered with a set of multiple lines, one for each order. And here we simply say, okay, let's get all of the items that we will render based on the array of orders that we have through the data interface that we are binding to the adaptive card. And under the cover, the rendering engine will simply render the same outline for every single order in the array of orders. And as such, then we render, for example, one column with the format date time. So yet another function that you can use when you do data binding in adaptive cards, with the format date time of the date property of the current order, providing the format string for the date, which is quite cool. We can also render the customer. This is just a string value, so I just output the same value. We can work with the amount of the order, and again, we can rely on the format number, but we can also play, for example, with a function like the if one, where we can evaluate the status of the order, of the current order item, and we can say, okay, if the status is 0, it will be inserted, the value of the status of the order. If it is 1, it will be processed, and so on, so forth. And that's how we render this column with the status of every single order item. Okay, now we can even do more. For example, we can play with the color that we use to render the status. So we can add an additional property to the text block rendering the status of the order, and the property could be the color one. From an adaptive card syntax point of view, the color can assume some predefined values like warning or accent or good, which will define the actual color for rendering the text. So for example, here again, we can play with data binding, so $curly brackets, and then we evaluate the status, and we can render the insert with the default value, with the default color, sorry, or we can render the processed with a warning, which will be a kind of an orange color. we can use the accent for the delivered and the green, which is good, as the color name in adaptive cards, for the completed order. So let me save the updated JSON for my adaptive card, and let me refresh the rendering of my card right here. So back to the preview mode, order lists. I don't know if you can see it through the screen sharing, but now we have the green color for the completed, and we have the different colors in place based on the status of the order. And that's an interesting information for you, because you can assume that almost any single or every single property that you have in the adaptive card schema definition can get a value which can be calculated or based on a data-bound value that you have in your data source for data binding. So you are not only limited to using the text value of a field, but you can play with color, we can play with size and stuff like that. Another interesting property that you can use when you work with data binding in adaptive card extensions is the $index keyword, which will provide you the index of the item that you are rendering right now whenever you render an array of items. So just for the sake of making an example, we can say something like, okay, render the $index of the current item followed by the date and time. So let me save it one more time and let me refresh the page to show you the output. So back to preview mode, and here we can see the index 0, 1, 2, so it is 0 based, but we can see the index of the line that we are rendering, which is again cool whenever you need to dynamically define a set of fields, for example, in the quick view that you are rendering, because just to make or just to give you an idea, you want to process the callback when the user will click a button to post eventually the content of the UI back to you, and you can intercept through the index which item has which value in the UI. So this is really cool, as well as you can, for example, provide row counting capabilities or stuff like that. Let's keep on talking about what we can do. There is another interesting property that we can play with, which is the $root. In fact, we have $index to refer to the current index of the current item. But what if right now here we are rendering every single order item in the array of orders, and we want, for example, to refer to a property which is not related to the current order, but it is related to the whole data source of the data binding. Just as a reminder, our data source is made of a subtitle, of a title, of the array of orders, and of the status filter. So if we want to access, for example, the status filter, which is a property defined at the root level of the data source and not inside every single order, we can use the following syntax. If my Visual Studio Code will follow me. Okay, so we can say $root inside a data binding clause dot, and we can play with the property, like for example, status filter that we want to use inside our adaptive card definition. So let me try to show you a useful and real example of this capability. And let's play with the visibility of the rows in my output. So let's assume that we want to use the isVisible property that we have in the adaptive card syntax, which can assume a Boolean value. Of course, if I will say isVisible false for every single row, and I will save, if I go back to my adaptive card in action, preview, and I click on the order list, of course, I will not have any line of orders because we don't have any of them visible based on the instruction that I gave to the adaptive card definition. But what if we want to create something smart, like having in the adaptive card definition a property called status filter of type number, and in the property pane, we define a set of values which will allow us to configure the adaptive card so that we can say, okay, let's do that. Let's show just the delivered orders in this card or just the completed orders. Why not? Okay, if we do that, we can also say in the JSON that instead of isVisible equal an explicit value, we can actually define a rule based On data binding, so here we can say is visible will be equal to if status is equal to $root status filter or status filter is -1, meaning show me everything, then I will provide true as the value for is visible. Otherwise, I will provide false. So let me save this one more time and let me go back to the rendering. Refresh, preview, and here we are. Now we simply have the completed orders. This is yet a really cool feature, in my opinion, that you can leverage. And to be completely fair with you, if you just want to play with the visibility of an item, you can even leverage an out-of-the-box capability that we have instead of the is visible, which is an example that I showed you just to give the idea that you can dynamically change the value of any of the properties of the adaptive card JSON definition, including some kind of complex logic based on properties that you have in the root object of the data binding. But we can even do more. The adaptive card JSON syntax, we have the $when property, which is defined just for the sake of making it possible for us to show or to not show an item based on a condition. So when we use the $when, like when we use the $data, we provide the data source for data binding. When we use $when, this means it will be visible when the condition provided as the value will be true. So I can say if, referring to the data binding, the status of the order, the current order is equal to the status filter, or again, the status filter is not defined, let's show the item. If not, let's hide the item. So I will save it one more time, and I will go back to show you the output, which will be exactly the same as before, but with a more correct syntax, let me say, because if you want to play with visibility, $when should be the right option for you. Now, we can do more. For example, when we build the UI of an adaptive card, and I will show you in another example that I already shared with you in a previous call, the Contoso Orders Adaptive Card sample. Here we have the Contoso Manage Orders Adaptive Card. In this one, we can play with this functionality. We can click on the chevron button, and we can expand or collapse a single order item. Here and show you this one. This should be the right one, exactly. Here we can rely on a really interesting option that we have in the adaptive card syntax, which is the action.toggle visibility. With this one, we can say that whenever the user will click on this item, we will target the visibility of one or more items. And as you can see here, we are using both the binding capability with the $ and the $index to identify a specific item in the list of orders that we have in the UI. So I'm basically saying when the user will click on this toggle visibility item, let's target the visibility of the items with the index of the currently clicked item. So that's why when I click on the chevron button, I can expand or collapse the specific item I'm clicking on. And in the definition of my adaptive card, I can say, okay, for example, the chevron down and the chevron up buttons IDs will be based on data binding using the $index of the current item. So here I'm referring to this item and this item. And I will play with their visibility as well as with the visibility of the order content container, which will render the actual form to edit the order. So again, I think this is really, really cool and powerful. Last sample that I want to show you, still just relying on the syntax, out-of-the-box syntax of the adaptive card JSON definition. We can also parse and manage JSON content, so for example, dynamic JSON content inside the rendering of an adaptive card. So let me switch to a different sample. And first of all, I need to stop this one. Let me switch to the other one that I have right here. And let me start this one while we talk about it. Gulp serve, no browser. Oops, no browser. Okay. This is just a really simple adaptive card extension in which I rely on the graph, Microsoft Graph, to get the me object, so the definition of myself, basically from a graph point of view. So here, whenever we call or we invoke the /me endpoint under graph, we get back a JSON representation of the current user. That's me right now. So here I simply get the me result, selecting these properties from the me object, and I store, for the sake of making an example, a JSON string with the user content inside the state of my adaptive card extension. So right here in the state, I define a string. Cool. Now, when I get the JSON stringify of the user inside this string, I can then use it as the content of the data source of my quick view, so that in the rendering of my quick view in the JSON, I can say that I want to do $JSON, which is a function provided by the adaptive card syntax. I provide the JSON string, and this function will do the parsing of the JSON, and then I can access any of the properties of the JSON object that I'm providing, which is, again, I think really, really powerful. Let me show you the output, and then it will be back to you, Julie. So let me edit this page. Let me remove this card and refresh. I will add my new read user data preview. And as you can see here in the quick view, I can see data coming out from my JSON object. So just for your reference, few links. So the adaptivecards.io site to get the whole syntax of adaptive cards. This second link is with the definition of all of the functions that I used, functions and keywords that I used in data binding. And the last link is the one where you can find all of the samples that I'm sharing with you through these ACES short demos. And that's all for me. Back to you, Julie, and thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Paulo. That was just some great stuff. I'm sure everybody got a lot out of that. All right, I'm just going to pass it over to Hugo for his design patterns installment, right? This is your
Yes, it's like a mini series.
Yeah. Dynasty Hugo edition.
You can also wait for the movie to come out. I apologize in advance. You know, the French-Canadian accent is not as soothing as the Italian accent, but I'll try to do my best. All right, so this is a series on design patterns. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to make every developer a designer without having to go to design school. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we're all going to, do super pretty web parts, but we're definitely going to be focusing on a better user experience and better design patterns overall. We've been talking about custom properties. We still have a few things to talk about custom properties and property panes. I can't wait to get to the parts where we talk about the content of the web part itself. But before we do, let's talk about property panes. All right, so this is a web part that I've created, and one of the things that I've done in that whole solution is something where I validate properties. And so if we take a look at kind of how this works, if I go in and I start typing here, if I remove the description, it says, hey, you need to provide a description. And if I put a description, it's happy. If I put a long description, it says, hey, the description can't be longer than 40 characters. Now, why is it important to do validation? Well, one of the things that we have to remember is, we've talked about this before, but from a user experience perspective, right? Users don't really like usually computers and software because software tends to make them feel stupid. And so not everyone is an expert at kind of programming web parts and coding and things like that. Think about the users who are potentially editing these pages and configuring your web parts. They might not know the logic that you've applied. They might not know that your description is required, and your code might not actually account for the description to be empty. Or look at another example, and I've seen this example plenty of times, where we're somehow expecting a list of a certain type to be available that has certain fields in that list. And we don't really say anything in the description or anything like that of that property. And people will pick a list and the web part won't work and it won't give an error message. But if you look at the logs behind the scene, it gives an error message. Now, every time we do something like this, where we don't help the user understand what's required, we make them feel a little bit stupid, right? So that's one of the aspects here is user experience. And when we do user experience, it's important to think of a few things. You know, the first thing is obviously try not to be too dramatic, right? Like fatal error. I know we still see some of these errors sometimes, but fatal error, like it's not that bad, right? Nobody's going to die here. So why are we ever saying something like fatal error? You know, I kind of tend to joke about error messages, and I tend to say that no developer should ever be allowed to create error messages because we have a tendency to write stuff like this, and it's just not that good. The other thing you got to be careful about, and this is actually a real error message, and it's hard to read. I apologize, but you got to be careful about what information you reveal with your error messages, right? Error, this password is already in use by Starboy98. Try another. That's not good, and that's actually a real error message. So let's be careful about that. Now, we'll come back to the user experience in a minute, but the other aspect we need to consider is security, right? Remember that security consists of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So those are the three things that we try to protect when we protect or when we apply security to things. Now, there's an organization called the OWASP Foundation. They do, and OWASP stands for Open Web Application Security Project, I believe. They're an online community that they kind of create like freely available articles, methodologies, documentations, and tools and stuff like that on how to improve web application security. And one of the things that they do every year is they produce kind of a top 10 concerns, security concerns or exploits, basically, or risks. And so in 2021, actually, this is 2017 to 2021, these were the top security risk. And you'll notice that in 2017, injection was actually a big issue. So the ability for someone to, maybe you're giving them a screen to enter their name or a description of a field or something like that, and you're allowing people to enter some stuff in that field that will get saved in the database, that will get executed, or when it gets displayed again, maybe on someone else's screen, that it actually can execute some malicious code. Now, thankfully, technologies are improving, right? React has built-in capabilities to prevent you from, by accident, injecting unsafe HTML. And you have to explicitly say, I know that this HTML can be unsafe for me to display it. So if we look at kind of in history here, we went from having injection in 2017 as the top to now it's at number 3. It's still kind of an issue, but we have to consider that. So when we look at our applications that we're building, even though SharePoint is doing a great job at protecting you, right? And we've talked about how you can mark fields as being HTML or containing text and things like that, so that SharePoint can actually do some validation and remove some malicious script. It's still possible for you to maybe capture some information and reveal some information that you shouldn't be doing. So any type of user-supplied data should always be validated, filtered, and or sanitized as much as you can. So if you're asking, should I do a validation for all my property panes? Yeah, you should. I'll skip the other ones, but we have to be careful about that. Now, how do I do validation of property pane? So if you remember, many sessions ago, we started talking about how you can use the get property pane configuration method to actually return an array of property pane configuration. And then what we have to do is we return the individual property pane texts or fields, that we want to display in the property pane. Now you'll notice that I've added a new attribute, property attribute, whatever. I've added a new thing on the property pane text field. that is on get error message. This is actually a standard error message or a standard method that you can call for pretty much any property pane field. And all you need to do is it's a function that gets past the value that was entered, and its job is to return an error message. So let's take a look at kind of what a validate description that I just demoed would look like. Now, I have to be clear, normally you would want to localize the text, not hard code the text like I did here, but just for simplicity purpose, I actually hard coded the text. Please don't scream at me. All right, so the validate description gets a value. That's the value that's been entered. And then it returns a string. Now, if the string contains text, it'll actually display that text. If the string is empty, it'll just say, okay, everything looks good. So all I do here is I just look if the value is null, or if I trim the value and it's equal to 0, then I say please provide a description. If the value is greater than the length of the value is greater than 40, I say please don't make it no longer than 40. Otherwise, I just return nothing, and that's how the behavior is going to work. Now let's take a look at what happens though if I start logging how often I actually validate the text. So here I'm going to start typing, and David will probably make fun of me because I've switched to a new keyboard and I'm not the fastest typer at these nowadays. But when you start typing, if you look on the right side here, I started logging when I validate, and you'll notice that it's actually validating every single time that I'm typing something, which might be the behavior you want, but we have to be careful about that. Because what if you're actually making some calls to something a bit more advanced, right? So for example, what if I wanted to validate a list from, go to actually SharePoint, query SharePoint and say, give me the list and see if it exists, right? It has to make calls to SharePoint. Or what if you're, I don't know, trying to validate a postal code or a zip code, right? And you're going against the database and you're calling an external API that has throttling and has limitations. Do you really want to search every time or validate the text every single time someone enters text? Well, there's something you can do with that. So let's talk about it. So one of the things that you can do with the property pane, here I use the text field. Now we'll talk in future sessions about how there's actually controls that are probably more suited or better suited for validating, a list name. But let's just pretend that we also want to verify that the list contains the right columns that we're looking for and things like that. So as you saw before, I now added a get error message for validate list name, and same thing, we get a string and we return, in this case, instead of returning a string, we return a promise. So what we're saying is, I'm not going to slow you down. If you have, just tell me when you need me to go validate my text, and I will go do that. And then what we do in this particular case, we actually just do an asynchronous call to SharePoint, where we pass, the value that's been entered, and we try to retrieve that list by title. And one thing that we got to be careful here is, again, we want to make sure that we're escaping that text. We probably should escape it a little bit more than just calling escape, but just don't take any text that's entered by the users and randomly throw it in there, because you don't know what we could be doing here in terms of injecting some bad stuff. Now, in this case, what I do is I say if the response is okay, in other words, if there was an actual list by that name, I will return no error message. If I get a 404, I'll say this list doesn't exist in the current site. And if there's an actual error, I'll say, oops, try again. And then a little try and catch, just in case something else happens, we can deal with that. So again, so what happens if you have slow APIs? What happens if I'm throttled and things like that, and I'm running out of time here? But one of the things that we can do that I know I spent a lot of time trying to work around this, and turns out there's a method you can do, or a function, or a feature, you can actually just say deferred validation time and specify the amount of time in milliseconds. So by default, the deferred validation time is 200 milliseconds. But if you want to actually kind of slow down the time that it takes and give the user the ability to type more text, you can do that as well. All right, so I had set some time to talk about error messages and guidelines and things like that. We're running out of time, so we'll have to do that another time. But in terms of code and my design series, that's it for me for today. Back to you, Julie.
Thank you so much, Hugo. I'm going to try to present in Teams again so we can get to the last slide. All right, so here we are at the end. The recording will be available 24 hours after this, or around 24 hours, and you can access them through that very quick link. Certainly follow us on Twitter, the Microsoft 365 Dev and Microsoft M365 PnP. Our next call will be on February 10th, so please definitely look to join us then. And for a bunch of links, and since we are live sharing, you can click on those. We have lots of community calls. We have the M365 platform call, which we talked about at the beginning, adaptive cards, identity platform, office add-ins, power apps, the M365 Dev SIG, and this SharePoint Framework one. So absolutely click on those to get them in your calendar and join us for all the fun. And that is all we have for this this session. So thank you again for everyone joining us. Thanks to our presenters, Derek, Paulo, and Hugo. They were wonderful. And have a really great rest of your week, everyone.